Once upon a time, in the heart of New York City, there lived a man named Ethan Caldwell. He was the kind of man people whispered about when he entered a room. Not just because he was young and handsome, but because he carried the weight of power on his shoulders. Tall, broad-shouldered, with steel blue eyes that seemed carved from winter, Ethan was a billionaire who lived high above the city in a glass tower that touched the clouds. Ethan always wore tailored suits, never a wrinkle out of place, and he was driven everywhere in sleek black cars that never stopped for strangers. People said he was cold. They said he had no family, no friends, no one he trusted, just money. And they were right. Ethan was alone. His brother had died 3 years ago, a soldier who never came home, and since then Ethan had poured himself into work and came back each night to silence. That was his life. But that life was about to change. It happened on one stormy night when the skies above Manhattan broke open. Rain fell hard, thunder rolled like drums across the city, and Ethan sat in the back seat of his sedan, staring out through tinted glass. His driver moved carefully through the traffic, wipers swiping furiously. Then, at a red light, Ethan saw her. A girl in a torn pink hoodie, sitting on the sidewalk, holding 2 trembling canine puppies against her chest. She did not beg, she did not move, she only shielded them from the rain with her thin arms. And in that moment, Ethan's heart stirred for the first time in years. He did not yet know her name, but destiny had already tied them together. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel to watch the next stories by clicking the subscribe button right below this video. Thank you. Amen. The rain had begun as a whisper that evening, a thin drizzle slanting through the canyon streets of Manhattan, blurring neon lights into ribbons of color across the glistening asphalt. By the time night wrapped itself around the city, the drizzle had swelled into sheets, a steady percussion against the windows of cars and the endless rise of glass towers. New York in the rain was a paradox, both suffocating and strangely intimate, its millions moving in hurried silhouettes under umbrellas or bent heads, as though each soul carried its own storm. From the 37th floor of the Caldwell Tower, the rain shimmered like liquid steel upon the broad glass panes. This building, erected only 3 years earlier, was the pride of the Caldwell Empire, a testament to wealth and to the relentless will of one man, Ethan Caldwell. Ethan was 35, tall and broad-shouldered, his presence commanding even when he wished to disappear. His dark blonde hair, often combed back, carried faint streaks of early gray near the temples, a reminder of years that felt far older than the number suggested. His face was angular, marked by a firm jaw and eyes the color of winter steel, gray-blue, cool and unreadable to most. Beneath tailored suits worth small fortunes, his body carried the sculpted endurance of someone who wrestled against the weight of private demons, more than any gym routine. He lived in silence, not because he lacked words, but because he had long since stopped trusting them. 3 years earlier, Ethan's older brother, Michael Caldwell, had died in Afghanistan. Michael had been a canine handler in the Marines, known among his unit for his courage and loyalty. Where Ethan carried ambition like a weapon, Michael had carried conviction, believing in service, believing in the silent bond between soldier and dog. His death had been violent, sudden, and merciless, a roadside bomb that spared neither him nor his canine partner, Duke. The loss had carved a hollow Ethan never truly filled. He inherited not only the family empire but also a sense that money, no matter how vast, could not resurrect the only man who had ever anchored him to purpose. And so Ethan, billionaire and supposed icon of power, had grown to despise the word success. He moved through his tower of glass, surrounded by luxury, yet every reflection in its polished surfaces reminded him of absence. His stated ambition, whispered only to himself, was no longer expansion or conquest. It was to build something in memory of his brother, a foundation for veterans, particularly canine handlers and their dogs, who so often returned broken or never returned at all. But foundations needed more than money. They needed conviction, presence, and humanity. Ethan feared he no longer possessed those. That evening, unwilling to remain another hour within the sterile brightness of his penthouse, Ethan chose to leave. He stepped into his chauffeured black sedan, the city glimmering through veils of rain. His driver, David Moore, was a man in his late 50s, bald with a neat salt and pepper beard. David's voice was calm, his posture straight, the kind of man who had served in disciplined work before. Rumor suggested law enforcement. For Ethan, David was more shadow than companion, a presence meant to deliver him from one point to another without intrusion. The car slid through Midtown, windshield wipers keeping rhythm with the storm. Traffic lights bled red and green across the wet streets. Horns blared. Vendors shouted despite the downpour. And yet, for Ethan, inside the cocoon of tinted windows, it was all muted. A world he moved through but never touched. Until the car slowed at an intersection. Through the sheeted glass, Ethan first dismissed it as another trick of the storm. A small figure hunched at the edge of the sidewalk, water pooling around her boots. But then the light flickered green to red again, and he saw clearly. She was young, perhaps no more than 22, thin in a way that spoke not of fashion but of hunger. Her hair was dark auburn, plastered to her cheeks, strands matted by the rain. Her skin was pale beneath the city's haze, her lips faintly trembling. She wore a pink hoodie, torn at the elbows, its fabric soaked through, clinging like a second skin. Both arms wrapped protectively around two small creatures pressed tight against her chest. At first, Ethan thought they were bundles of rags, but then one of the bundles stirred, revealing a small, angular muzzle and ears too large for its head. Puppies, two German Shepherd canine pups, their fur mottled black and tan, tails tucked under in fear, eyes wide as coins. They were only weeks old, their paws too big for their fragile frames, already showing the raw lineage of working dogs bred for loyalty and strength. One whimpered softly, the sound barely audible above the rain. The girl sat unmoving, as though carved into the stone of the city itself. She didn't raise a hand for money, didn't call out, didn't even notice the luxury car idling before her. She simply held the puppies closer, her chin bent down, her body a shield against the world that walked past her. Something tugged violently inside Ethan. He felt the dissonance of the scene, himself, a man armored in wealth and silence, staring at a stranger soaked to the bone yet stubborn in her fragile guardianship. The puppies reminded him of Duke, his brother's canine, the memory still raw in his chest. And the girl, there was something in the way she clutched them, as though the only thing holding her in existence was the warmth of two shivering lives. "Do you see her?" Ethan's voice broke the car's hush, low, almost reluctant. David flicked his eyes to the sidewalk, then back to the road. His answer was careful, professional. "Yes, sir, there are many like her in this part of town. The shelters—" "Not like her," Ethan interrupted, his eyes fixed. The light turned green. David hesitated, waiting for the command. Ethan gave none. His chest rose and fell, caught between the instinct to remain unmoved and the inexorable pull toward the figure in the rain. His brother's voice seemed to echo in his mind, words from years past. "It's never about what you keep, Ethan. It's about what you protect." The car remained at the curb as traffic honked behind them. Ethan leaned forward, his voice firmer. "Stop here. Now." David's brow furrowed. "Sir, this isn't the best neighborhood." "I said stop." The sedan eased against the curb. Before David could protest further, Ethan pushed the door open. Cold rain rushed in, soaking the tailored fabric of his suit in seconds. He stepped out, shoes sinking into the shallow flood at the street's edge. The air smelled of gasoline, wet concrete, and roasted chestnuts from a vendor's cart half a block away. But all he noticed was the girl. She lifted her head slightly as he approached, her eyes startling in their resilience, a pale hazel, rimmed with exhaustion, yet sharp with defiance. She looked at him not as a savior, not as a billionaire framed in headlines, but as another intruder into her fragile perimeter. She tightened her arms around the puppies, shielding them further. Up close, Ethan saw the animals more clearly. The first pup, later known as Scout, had a faint scar along its flank, as though scraped from crawling through debris. Its eyes were luminous amber, already watchful, protective despite its size. The second, Ranger, was slightly smaller, his ears flopping sideways, a softer spirit with a tendency to whimper, pressing his muzzle against his sibling for reassurance. The girl's voice came out hoarse, edged with suspicion. "What do you want?" Ethan paused, water dripping from his hair, plastering it to his forehead. He realized, absurdly, he had no rehearsed line, no practiced negotiation. He simply said, "I saw you." For a heartbeat, silence stretched between them, broken only by the storm. Then one of the puppies sneezed, a tiny shuddering sound. The girl adjusted her grip, whispering something to it under her breath, words he could not hear but understood all the same. It was the sound of someone who had nothing yet gave everything. David had stepped out too, umbrella raised though already useless. He shot Ethan a questioning look, silently urging him back into the safety of the car. But Ethan ignored him. His eyes never left the girl nor the fragile lives in her arms. The city churned around them, horns blaring, strangers rushing past, indifferent. Yet in that corner of New York, on a rain-soaked curb, a man with billions and a girl with nothing stood as if the world had narrowed to their shared gaze. For Ethan Caldwell, it was the first flicker of purpose he had felt in years, and though he did not yet know her name, or the weight of her story, or why fate had placed her in his path beneath the storm, he understood one thing with sudden clarity. His life was about to change. The rain had not let up by the time Ethan Caldwell stepped closer to the young woman in the pink hoodie. Water coursed down his tailored suit and gathered at his collar, but he hardly noticed. The girl's arms tightened around the two German shepherd pups as though he might snatch them away. Her eyes, pale hazel rimmed in fatigue, were striking not because they were beautiful, but because they carried the weight of someone who had lived too many years of hurt inside too few years of life. She shifted on the cold sidewalk, wary, her posture that of a cornered animal. Ethan spoke quietly. "I'm not here to hurt you." The girl hesitated, then glanced down at the puppies. The larger one, Scout, growled faintly, his tiny teeth bared in a defensive gesture far beyond his size. Ranger, the smaller, whimpered and pressed his face deeper into her soaked hoodie. She stroked their heads, whispering to them before answering. "My name's Grace. Grace Holloway." Her voice was soft but cracked, worn by hunger and damp. Up close, Ethan saw the raw bones of her cheeks, the pale curve of her jaw, and the stubborn line of her lips. She was 22, though her sunken features might have made her look younger or older depending on the light. Her hoodie, once a bright pink, was faded and torn at the sleeves. Her jeans were frayed, her sneakers held together with duct tape. Yet she held herself with an air of refusal, unwilling to beg. Ethan crouched slightly, rain dripping from his hair. "Grace. And them?" He nodded to the pups. "They're all I've got, Scout and Ranger. Their mother was a K9, saved my life in a fire back home. She didn't make it out. They did." Her words were sharp, clipped, as though rehearsed many times to fend off questions. David, the chauffeur, hovered behind with the umbrella, looking uncomfortable. Pedestrians skirted the scene, some throwing quick glances at the billionaire in the rain, but none daring to intervene. Ethan's chest tightened at her mention of a K9 mother. His brother's ghost stirred again. "You shouldn't be out here," he said. "Not in this storm, not like this." Grace lifted her chin, defiant. "And where should I be? Shelters kick you out if you bring dogs. People don't want to see you if you've got nothing to give them. Out here, at least. It's honest." Her honesty cut deeper than she knew. Ethan extended a hand, not to touch her, but an invitation. "Come with me, all three of you." Grace blinked rain from her lashes, suspicion rising. "Why? So you can feel good about yourself? Throw me a blanket and forget me in the morning?" Ethan shook his head slowly. "Because once, someone told me life isn't about what you keep. It's about what you protect, and I think I'm supposed to protect you." For the first time, the steel in her eyes flickered. She looked at Scout and Ranger, who trembled in her arms. Then she whispered, "All right." Ethan gestured to David. "Bring them into the car." David hesitated. "Sir." "Do it," Ethan said firmly. Grace rose, her knees stiff from sitting in the cold. She followed Ethan toward the sedan, clutching the pups tightly. As she slid into the back seat, the warmth of the leather wrapped around her like something foreign. Scout sniffed suspiciously at the seats, while Ranger curled against her side, instantly lulled. Inside the car, the city noise faded again. Ethan sat opposite her, drenched but composed. Grace eyed him warily, as though waiting for the trick. He studied her, how her knuckles were raw, how her eyes darted constantly to exits, how she kept one protective arm around the dogs even now. The ride north through the city was silent except for the hum of tires on wet asphalt. Finally, Grace whispered, "Why me?" Ethan considered his reflection in the dark glass before answering. "Maybe because you remind me of someone I lost." The sedan glided uptown, past glowing billboards and shuttered shops, until finally it stopped before the towering glass structure of Caldwell Tower. Grace's lips parted slightly in awe at the building's height, but she quickly masked it with suspicion. "Where are we?" "My home." Ethan said simply. The penthouse greeted them with silence, broken only by the faint hum of central heating. The vast living room stretched in marble and glass, chandeliers gleaming overhead, artwork lining the walls. To Grace, it felt more like a museum than a place to live. She hovered at the entrance, wet shoes squeaking against the polished floor, afraid her very presence might leave a stain. Scout barked once, the sound echoing too loudly in the expanse. Grace hushed him quickly. Ranger sniffed the air and sneezed, tail tucked. Ethan set his soaked jacket aside and turned to Grace. "You're safe here. No one will turn you away because of them." Grace shifted uneasily. "Safe. Doesn't feel real to me anymore." Before Ethan could answer, another figure appeared from the corridor. Victor Hale, Ethan's chief financial officer and personal advisor, was a man in his mid-40s. He was tall but lean, with thinning black hair combed back neatly, rectangular glasses perched on a long nose, and a tailored suit that seemed part of his very skin. His expression was always calculating, lips thin, eyes restless behind the lenses. Victor froze at the sight of Grace and the pups dripping water on the marble. "Mr. Caldwell, what is this?" His voice was clipped, edged with disapproval. Ethan met his gaze calmly. "This is Grace. She'll be staying here tonight." Victor adjusted his glasses, his jaw tightening. "With respect, Ethan, the press is already circling like sharks. Bringing strays into the tower will not go unnoticed. One photograph, one whisper, and your reputation our company could unravel overnight." Grace stiffened, clutching the pups closer. She muttered, "Told you, nothing's free." Ethan's voice cooled. "She's not a stray. She's under my protection now." Victor exhaled sharply. "You have responsibilities, Ethan, to shareholders, to this empire your father built. You cannot risk it all for some impulsive act of charity." The words landed like stones in the quiet room. Grace's eyes darted to Ethan, waiting to see if he would fold under the pressure. But he stood tall, shoulders squared. "I built this empire," Ethan said evenly, "and I say what risks I take. She stays." Victor's eyes narrowed, but he bowed his head slightly, hiding whatever storm brewed behind his spectacles. "Very well. But don't say I didn't warn you." He turned and disappeared down the hall, his polished shoes tapping disapproval into the marble. The silence that followed felt heavier than before. Grace shifted awkwardly. "You should have listened to him. He's right. People like me ruin people like you." Ethan shook his head. "People like you remind people like me what matters." She studied him for a moment, hazel eyes softening, but the walls around her heart remained. She crouched to dry Scout and Ranger with a towel one of the staff brought. Scout squirmed, playful despite exhaustion, while Ranger licked her hand timidly. Watching them, Ethan felt something stir inside him, a warmth long absent from this penthouse of glass and silence. Grace finally sat back, damp strands of auburn hair falling into her face. "I don't know why you're doing this, but for tonight, thank you." Ethan nodded. He didn't say aloud what he knew deep in his chest, that her arrival with her hidden eyes and her fragile guardianship of two pups was the first crack in the armor he had worn for years, and from that crack, light was beginning to seep through. The morning sun crept across the skyline of New York like a shy intruder, pale light bouncing from glass towers still slick with rain from the storm the night before. Inside Caldwell Tower, silence reigned, but it was no longer the same sterile silence Ethan Caldwell had lived with for years. Now, faint scratches of puppy claws echoed across marble floors, soft barks disturbed the hush of the penthouse, and for the first time in years, the air seemed less hollow. Grace Holloway sat curled at the edge of a deep leather sofa, her pink hoodie dried but still frayed draped loosely around her thin frame. Scout, the larger pup, chewed determinedly on a cushion corner until she pulled it away, murmuring a half-hearted scolding. Ranger, timid as ever, pressed close against her thigh, his ears floppy, his amber eyes watchful. Grace's auburn hair, still tangled from the storm, caught the light in muted copper strands. She looked less like a guest and more like someone afraid to vanish if she blinked. Ethan watched her quietly from across the room. He had changed into a charcoal sweater, sleeves pushed up, his hair still damp from an early shower. Something about the sight unsettled him, not the presence of this stranger in his fortress of glass, but the strange familiarity she carried. There was a connection forming, invisible yet undeniable. Grace shifted uneasily under his gaze and pulled the hoodie tighter. "You keep staring," she muttered. "I'm trying to understand you," Ethan said, his voice calm. "There's nothing to understand." Her words were sharp, a reflexive shield, but as she adjusted her hoodie, a small tear at the hem revealed something tucked into the inner seam. A faded envelope, edges bent and stained. She shoved it back quickly, but Ethan's eyes caught it. "What is that?" he asked. Her face stiffened, lips parting in a denial that never came. Ethan's tone softened. "May I see it?" For a long moment, she clutched the envelope as though it were her last defense. Then reluctantly, she extended it. "I found it a long time ago. It's all I've ever had." The paper was brittle with age, the ink smudged but legible. Ethan unfolded it slowly, his heart stalling as his eyes scanned the handwriting. He knew it instantly. He had memorized it in birthday cards, in notes slipped under his office door, in letters from overseas. The looping, forceful strokes belonged to Michael Caldwell, his brother. The letter was incomplete, ending abruptly mid-sentence. "If I don't make it back, and if by chance she is left alone, please, whoever finds this, protect Grace Holloway. She deserves a life beyond the shadows. She deserves—" Ethan's hand trembled as he held the paper. His breath caught, memories of his brother flooding like reopened wounds. Michael had known Grace. Michael had written this, not as a passing favor, but as a plea. He looked up, voice tight. "Voice, how did you get this?" Grace's hazel eyes flickered with guarded pain. "He gave it to me, back when he saved me." She swallowed, her voice breaking. "There was a fire in my hometown 2 years before he died. People were trapped in a house. I shouldn't have been there, but I was. He carried me out, and the dog with him, the mother of Scout and Ranger. She died from the smoke. He pressed this letter into my hand before the medics took me away. Said one day I'd understand." Ethan felt his knees weaken. His brother's shadow seemed to stand between them, binding them across years and circumstance. "He never told me." Grace hugged the pups tighter. "Maybe he couldn't. Maybe he didn't think you'd want to know about someone like me." Ethan's chest burned. The envelope had been a wall, a hidden truth between brothers, and now it lay broken open. The quiet fractured when footsteps echoed from the hall. Victor Hale entered, his polished shoes announcing him before his voice did. He wore a navy suit today, tie knotted precisely, glasses glinting under the sunlight. His expression was tight, irritation carved into every line. "Ethan, we need to talk," Victor said briskly. His eyes darted to Grace and the pups, lips curling in thin disdain. "Privately." "She stays," Ethan replied without hesitation. Victor's jaw clenched. "Very well." He adjusted his glasses and unfolded a tablet, sliding it across the table. The screen glowed with headlines. Billionaire Caldwell shelters street girl and dogs. Paparazzi photos, blurry but damning, showed Ethan's sedan the night before, a figure in pink climbing inside. "The story is spreading," Victor said coldly. "Shareholders are furious. They're calling emergency meetings. Ethan, they're threatening legal action if you continue this reckless adoption of strays." Grace flinched at the word. Scout growled faintly, picking up her unease. Ethan's expression hardened. "She isn't a stray, she's under my care. And those pups carry more loyalty in their paws than half the men in that boardroom." Victor's eyes narrowed. "Emotion will not save you from a lawsuit. The board believes your actions jeopardize billions. If you want to keep your empire, you must send her away. Now." Grace stood abruptly, clutching the pups, her face pale. "I knew this was temporary. Don't fight for me. I'll go." Ethan turned sharply to her. "No. You stay." His voice was iron, louder than he intended. "Michael wanted you protected. That's all I need to know." Victor blinked, startled. "Michael?" Ethan handed him the envelope. Victor adjusted his glasses and read, his face paling slightly as recognition dawned. "This is authentic." He looked up, a flicker of unease in his usually cold eyes. Yes, Ethan said quietly. And if the board wants a fight, they'll have one. Victor exhaled, slipping the letter back into its envelope. You're risking everything, Ethan. Then so be it, Ethan replied. For the first time in years, I know what I'm fighting for. Victor hesitated, then inclined his head stiffly. I'll deliver your message to the board, but do not expect them to surrender easily. He turned on his heel and left, the echo of his shoes fading into the silence. Grace sank back onto the sofa, shaking slightly. Scout rested his head on her lap, while Ranger whimpered softly against her chest. She stroked them, her eyes glistening. You don't have to do this, she whispered. Ethan sat beside her, his steel blue eyes softening. My brother gave his life for this country. He asked for one thing in return, that someone protect you. I won't betray him, or you. Grace lowered her gaze, tears slipping down her cheeks. For the first time since stepping into the tower, her defenses cracked. Then maybe I don't have to run anymore. Ethan leaned back, exhaling slowly. The storm outside had ended, but a greater storm was building. One not of weather, but of power and truth. And the board would come for him. The press would devour the story. Yet here, in the fragile presence of a girl with haunted eyes and 2 trembling pups, Ethan knew he had crossed a wall he could never return from, and he didn't want to. The storm in the city had shifted from rain to something sharper, invisible, yet more vicious. Words. By midweek, every headline screamed Ethan Caldwell's name. Billionaire loses mind over street girl. Caldwell Tower or Caldwell Circus? Pink hoodie mystery. Who is she? News vans parked outside the tower gates, and reporters swarmed like gulls, shouting questions through the iron rails. Photos of Grace, blurry and intrusive, filled the tabloids, accompanied by speculation and venom. Inside the penthouse, Grace Holloway sat on the edge of the sofa, a newspaper trembling in her hands. The ink headline carved across the page, Gutter Girl or Gold Digger. A paparazzi shot of her holding Scout and Ranger was plastered below, her face pale, eyes wary, the caption cruel. She set it down quickly, her breath catching. The pups, sensing her unease, tried to distract her in their own ways. Scout, the bolder one, barked sharply at the crumpled paper, as though ready to attack the insult itself. Ranger whimpered and climbed into her lap, pressing his tiny body against her chest. Grace stroked them both, her fingers shaking. Ethan entered the room, tall and composed, though the storm in his steel blue eyes betrayed him. He wore a navy suit, no tie, his jaw set tight. Don't read that trash, he said softly. Grace looked up, anger flashing behind her fear. They're right. They think I'm here to steal from you, that I'm nothing but a parasite. Maybe they're right. They're not. His voice cut through, firm. You know they're not. She opened her mouth, then closed it. The silence between them stretched until Scout barked again, breaking it. Before Ethan could answer, Victor Hale strode in, his polished shoes echoing. His tie was blood red today, his expression even sharper than usual. He carried a tablet under one arm. Ethan, Victor said briskly. The board has called an emergency conference. They want answers, and they want them now. If you don't comply, they'll vote to strip you of the chairmanship. Grace stiffened. Ethan glanced at her, then back at Victor. Where? The Grand Meridian Hotel. They've already gathered. You're late. Grace clutched Ranger tighter. Maybe you should just tell them what they want to hear. Say you'll get rid of me. I can leave. I'm good at leaving. Ethan knelt in front of her, his broad frame casting a shadow. You're not leaving. His eyes, sharp yet warm, held hers until she lowered her gaze. Then he rose, grabbed his coat, and turned to Victor. Let's go. The ballroom of the Grand Meridian Hotel glowed with gold light, chandeliers dripping crystals that scattered reflections across polished floors. But the air was anything but grand. Dozens of board members and shareholders filled the space, their voices a low hum of dissatisfaction. At the center, a long table stretched, with microphones and cameras set for the press briefing that would follow. At the head of the table sat Margaret Winslow, the board's senior chair. A woman in her early 60s, she was tall, thin, with silver blonde hair cut in a sleek bob. Her cheekbones were sharp, her eyes icy blue, and her suits were always impeccably tailored. Once a close ally of Ethan's father, she had little patience for sentiment. Her voice, when she spoke, was clipped and precise. Mr. Caldwell, she said, her tone carrying across the room, Your recent behavior has jeopardized this company's reputation. Your insistence on harboring a homeless woman and 2 stray animals has made us a laughingstock." Murmurs rippled through the boardroom. Reporters scribbled furiously. Ethan sat tall, hands clasped before him. "Her name is Grace, and those pups are not strays. They're descendants of a K9 that saved lives. They matter." Margaret's lips tightened. "Do not mistake pity for leadership. Investors are pulling out. Stocks have dropped 7%. The damage is real, Ethan. You must choose. Your company or this charity case." The room buzzed louder. Victor shifted beside Ethan, expression unreadable. At that moment, a door at the back opened. Gasps spread as Grace entered, clutching Scout and Ranger to her chest. She wore her pink hoodie, freshly laundered but still frayed. Her auburn hair had been brushed, though it fell in stubborn tangles around her shoulders. Her hazel eyes darted nervously as flashes from cameras hit her. Ethan rose, startled. "Grace, I have to say it," she whispered, stepping forward. Margaret arched a brow. "And who invited her?" Grace's voice shook at first, but grew steadier as she held the microphone. "You all think I'm here to take something from him. But the truth is, I didn't even want to live." The room fell still. Grace's hands trembled, but she pressed on. "After my parents died, after the fire that killed the only dog who ever saved me, I thought about ending it all. I thought about just stopping. But then these 2 pups came into my life, Scout and Ranger. They needed me, and because they needed me, I stayed. I fought. They gave me a reason to breathe when I had none." Her voice cracked. Scout whimpered. Ranger licked her hand. Tears streaked her cheeks, but she did not falter. "So if you think I'm a parasite, fine. If you think I'm dirt, fine. But don't say they don't matter. Don't say the only thing that matters is money. Because sometimes the smallest lives hold us together when everything else falls apart." The silence was absolute. Even the reporters lowered their pens. Ethan stood, moved to her side, and placed a steady hand on her shoulder. His voice rang through the hall, stronger than it had in years. "This is what you don't understand. This isn't charity. This isn't recklessness. This is legacy. My brother gave his life serving with a K9 partner. He believed in protecting the vulnerable no matter the cost. And so do I. If protecting Grace and these pups costs me my chairmanship, then so be it, because I refuse to betray his memory or my own humanity." The declaration hit the board like a thunderclap. Margaret's icy mask cracked for just a second, a flicker of something, perhaps shame, perhaps fear. Reporters surged with questions, but none louder than the silence of realization that Ethan Caldwell, billionaire, had chosen something other than power. That night, back at Caldwell Tower, Grace sat quietly on the sofa, the pups curled asleep at her feet. Ethan stood near the window, staring at the storm of lights below. His shoulders were heavy, but his eyes were lighter somehow. Grace spoke softly, almost to herself. "You gave it all up for me." Ethan turned, his gaze steady. "No, I gave it all up for what my brother believed in, for what I should have believed in all along. You just reminded me." Scout stirred, resting his paw over Ranger as though claiming the role of guardian. Ethan watched them and felt the truth settle inside him. This wasn't the end of his empire. It was the beginning of something greater. The fallout from the Grand Meridian confrontation swept across New York like wildfire. By dawn the next day, footage of Ethan Caldwell's words had circled every channel, every online feed. Clips of Grace Holloway's trembling confession and Ethan's fierce declaration filled news cycles, dissected by anchors with practiced gravitas and amplified by voices on the street. Some headlines were cruel still. Billionaire throws empire away for street girl. But others carried a different tone. A billionaire with a heart. Legacy of loyalty. Caldwell stands with canines and orphans. The public was divided, but the shift was undeniable. Ethan stood by the penthouse windows that morning, coffee cooling in his hands, his gray-blue eyes fixed on the sea of reporters outside the tower gates. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like the city's prisoner. He felt like its witness. Grace sat nearby at the kitchen island, wearing borrowed clothes far too large for her slight frame. One of Ethan's sweaters draped nearly to her knees, sleeves rolled up clumsily. She looked younger, softer without the pink hoodie's armor. Scout gnawed at a slipper beneath her chair, while Ranger, timid as always, napped curled in her lap. She absently stroked his ears, gaze distant. "You meant it, didn't you?" Grace asked suddenly. Ethan turned. "Meant what?" "What you said, that I'm family." His chest tightened. "I don't make promises I can't keep." Her hazel eyes flickered, glassy but alive. For the first time since he'd met her, she smiled. Not wide, not certain, but a fragile spark breaking through the shadows. The day was far from over. At noon, Victor Hale appeared, summoned to the penthouse for a briefing. His polished shoes echoed against the marble as he strode in, briefcase snapping shut at his side. His black hair was combed meticulously, but sweat glistened faintly at his temple. "Ethan," Victor began, his voice clipped. "The board is furious. They want blood. Some are preparing lawsuits. Others want you out permanently. You've made enemies you cannot afford." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Then let them come." Victor's expression faltered. For a moment something flickered in his eyes, fear perhaps, but it was quickly masked. "Defiance is not a strategy," he snapped. "You need allies. Without them, your empire will collapse." Before Ethan could answer, Grace entered with Scout and Ranger at her heels. Her presence made Victor's lips curl in disdain. "And here's the cause of it all," he muttered. Grace froze, clutching Ranger to her chest. Ethan's eyes darkened. "Enough, Victor." But Grace spoke before he could. "You hate me because you think I'll ruin him. Maybe you're right. But at least I don't lie about who I am." Victor stiffened, color rising in his cheeks. "Watch your mouth, girl. You don't know anything about—" The sound of a phone buzzing cut him off. Ethan reached for his own, but it was Grace's small flip phone that rattled on the counter, an old, battered device she hadn't used in days. The screen displayed a number she didn't recognize. Against instinct, she answered. A woman's voice, low and hurried, spilled through the line. "Be careful. Victor isn't who he says he is." The call ended abruptly. Grace blinked, heart racing. She looked from the phone to Victor, who stood rigid, his face paling. "What was that?" Ethan asked sharply. Grace repeated the words. Ethan's gaze fixed on Victor, who bristled. "This is absurd. A prank call. Don't let paranoia." But Ethan was already moving. He grabbed Victor's briefcase and flipped it open before the man could protest. Inside, neatly arranged, were contracts and correspondence's emails printed in full. Ethan scanned them, his breath stilling. They were letters between Victor and a media conglomerate notorious for smear campaigns. Plans, dates, payments. Victor had leaked the story, fed the frenzy, all to destabilize Ethan's standing and maneuver himself closer to power. The air in the room thickened. Grace clutched Ranger tighter. Scout growled softly at Victor's feet. "You," Ethan said slowly, voice like ice. "You've been orchestrating this." Victor's mask cracked, his shoulders slumped, then stiffened again. "I did what had to be done. You've lost your way, Ethan. Someone had to protect the company. I was ready to lead when you fell." "You betrayed me," Ethan said, each word deliberate. "And you used Grace to do it." Victor's jaw clenched. She was easy leverage. The world eats up scandal. All I had to do was feed them her story. Ethan's fists tightened at his sides. For a moment he looked ready to strike, but Grace touched his arm gently, whispering, "Don't. He isn't worth it." The words pulled Ethan back from the edge. He exhaled, cold fury settling into resolve. "Pack your things, Victor. You're finished here." Victor's face flushed crimson. "You'll regret this." Ethan's steel blue eyes narrowed. "No, Victor. You will." Victor stormed out, the slam of the door reverberating through the tower. The revelations hit the press within hours, leaked by someone within the board who had grown weary of Victor's scheming. Headlines shifted overnight. Victor Hale exposed, the man behind Caldwell's smear campaign. Public turns on board as Caldwell stands firm. Crowds began to gather, not in protest, but in support. Outside Caldwell Tower, posters appeared. "Protect Canine Heroes." "Grace deserves better. Caldwell's cause is ours." In response, Ethan moved swiftly. With Grace at his side, he announced the launch of the Michael Caldwell Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to supporting military canine units, fallen handlers' families, and homeless youth like Grace. The announcement took place in the same ballroom where the board had tried to destroy him. Standing before cameras, Ethan's voice was steady. Money cannot save a soul, but love can. This foundation is more than charity, it's family. Grace is not an outsider, she is family, and these dogs, small as they are, remind us of the loyalty we owe to one another. My brother gave his life for that principle. I intend to honor it. Grace stood beside him, Scout and Ranger nestled at her feet, their tails wagging nervously at the flash of cameras. For the first time, she didn't shrink from the lights. Her hazel eyes shone, no longer just weary, but carrying hope. The crowd erupted in applause. Reporters shouted questions, but for once, the words were drowned by support, not scandal. That night, back at the tower, Ethan sat with Grace on the balcony. The city stretched below them, glittering with 1,000 lights. Scout slept sprawled across Grace's lap, while Ranger nosed curiously at Ethan's sleeve. "You didn't have to do all this," Grace whispered. "I did," Ethan said softly, "because this isn't about saving you. It's about saving myself, and maybe, just maybe, saving others too." Grace looked at him, her lips trembling into a smile. "Then maybe your brother was right. Maybe I was worth saving." Ethan's throat tightened, but he didn't answer. Instead, he let the silence speak, a silence no longer empty, but full of possibility. The weeks that followed Victor Hale's fall were a storm of noise and silence. Noise from the press, who feasted on every detail of Ethan Caldwell's defiance, and silence from the boardroom, where lawsuits still lingered like vultures circling. But inside the glass walls of Caldwell Tower, life began to change in ways Ethan had never imagined. The penthouse, once a cavern of marble and shadow, was filled with new sounds. The scuffle of paws across the polished floor, the laughter of a girl who had forgotten how to smile, the faint scratching of pencils on paper as Grace Holloway tried to remember what it meant to be a student again. Grace, now dressed in simple jeans and borrowed blouses, looked different. Her auburn hair was often pulled back into a loose ponytail, revealing the delicate oval of her face. Her hazel eyes, no longer dulled by hunger, carried warmth. She had enrolled in evening classes at a community college, determined to finish what her past had torn from her. Ethan had insisted on covering the tuition, but Grace had insisted just as fiercely on working part-time at a small bookstore nearby, her way of proving she was more than the girl in the pink hoodie. Scout and Ranger grew quickly. Their paws, once too big for their bodies, now matched their bounding energy. Scout remained the bold one, his ears sharp, his bark loud, forever protective of Grace. Ranger, though, was softer, his floppy ear still stubborn, his amber eyes gentler. He followed Ethan from room to room, often curling beside his chair like a shadow, as though sensing the ache that never fully left him. But the greatest surprise came one crisp morning in October, when the air smelled faintly of rain and fallen leaves. A knock sounded on the penthouse door. Ethan opened it to find Dr. Henry Collins, a veterinarian in his early 50s, waiting with a small black case. Collins was tall, with thinning sandy hair and kind brown eyes behind round glasses. He wore a worn tweed jacket over a plaid shirt, a man more at home in barns than skyscrapers. His manner was gentle, his smile faint, but reassuring. "Mr. Caldwell," he said, "I believe I have results you'll want to hear." Ethan led him inside, where Grace waited with Scout and Ranger at her feet. The pups wagged their tails curiously at the stranger, Scout barking once before circling. Ranger sniffed cautiously, leaning closer only when Grace gave a nod of encouragement. Collins opened his case, withdrawing a sealed envelope, his voice lowered, solemn. "The DNA analysis you requested. It confirms lineage." Ethan's pulse quickened. He tore the envelope open, eyes scanning the page. His breath caught. His brother's name, Michael Caldwell, appeared in the records. The pups, Scout and Ranger, were direct descendants of Duke, the canine who had died beside Michael overseas. Grace's eyes widened as Ethan lowered the paper. "So, they're his?" she whispered. Ethan nodded slowly, voice thick. "They're Duke's bloodline, my brother's partner, his legacy." Silence fell, but it wasn't empty. It was filled with awe, with something larger than coincidence. Grace pressed her face into Scout's fur, tears dampening his coat. Ranger pawed at Ethan's knee as though claiming him too. Dr. Collins packed his case quietly, understanding the weight of the moment. "Sometimes," he said softly, "fate brings back what we thought was gone." Then he slipped away, leaving them to the miracle. Ethan sat heavily on the sofa, running a hand through his hair. He whispered to no one and everyone at once, "Brother, You sent them back to me. Life did not become simple. The board stripped Ethan of his chairmanship, replacing him with Margaret Winslow, whose icy competence soothed nervous shareholders. Yet Ethan did not fight the decision. He had expected it. The empire was no longer the center of his life. Instead, he poured his energy into the Michael Caldwell Foundation, working side by side with veterans, canine handlers, and children who had nowhere else to go. Grace joined him, often organizing events, her voice steady as she spoke of her own survival. Her story, once tabloid fodder, became a testament to resilience. One evening, after a long day at the Foundation's office, Ethan returned to the penthouse. The lights were warm, the scent of pasta drifted from the kitchen where Grace experimented with cooking. Scout chased a rubber ball across the marble, sliding comically into a table, while Ranger trotted proudly with a chew toy. Their barks echoed off the walls that had once known only silence. Ethan leaned against the doorway, watching. His lips curved into a smile he didn't know he still had. For years he had thought love and laughter were relics of another life, buried with Michael and Duke. Yet here they were again, two pups, a girl in a sweater too big for her, and the sound of belonging. Grace turned, catching his gaze. "You're smiling," she teased. "Am I?" he asked. "Yeah, don't stop. It looks good on you." He chuckled softly, shaking his head. "This place doesn't feel like mine anymore. It feels like ours." Grace blinked, her cheeks warming, but she said nothing. She didn't need to. Later that night, after the dishes were washed and the pups asleep at their feet, Ethan stepped onto the balcony. The city sprawled beneath, a galaxy of lights. He whispered into the wind, "Michael, I found them. The family you wanted me to protect. And they saved me too." Grace stepped beside him, wrapping her arms around herself against the chill. "Talking to him again?" Ethan nodded. "Every night." She leaned closer, her shoulder brushing his. "Then tell him thank you. From me too." Scout barked once in his sleep inside, as if in agreement. Ranger twitched, chasing dreams. The penthouse, once a monument to isolation, now hummed with the ordinary music of life, barks, laughter, shared silences. And in that moment, Ethan Caldwell, billionaire, brother, guardian, understood that legacy was not built in boardrooms or bank accounts. It was built in love, in loyalty, in the lives we choose to protect. Sometimes life does not give us what we expect, but it gives us what we need. Ethan thought he was losing everything, yet in the faces of a young woman and two small dogs, he found the meaning of family, loyalty, and love. In our own lives, we may not face boardrooms or newspapers, but we all face moments where we must choose between fear and compassion. When we choose compassion, we never walk alone. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel for more stories of courage and redemption. May God bless you and your loved ones, and may He guide you toward kindness each day. If you believe in the power of love and second chances, write Amen in the comments.